WisconsinEye is partnering with the League of Wisconsin Municipalities for a special show on how local governments are financed. The League's title for this show, Strangled by Levy Limits. So let's talk about that with the leader of the League of Wisconsin Municipalities and 3 local administrators. And before we get into some of these specific issues, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and their communities. Jerry, you want to start?
Thanks, Steve. I'm Jerry Deshane. I'm the executive director of the League.
Thank you. And Paul?
I'm Paul Everett. I'm the administrator for the Village of Howard.
And how many people in Howard?
19,327.
Thanks, Paul.
I'm Eric Brooks, the mayor of the city of South Milwaukee. Good morning. And about 21,000 people.
21,000. And sure.
Sharon Evelyn, the administrator for the city of Clintonville. We have 4,487.
You have the smallest community represented on
Yes.
this panel.
We are very small.
I'm glad we're on Facebook Live because it gives people a chance, including League members, to respond to some of these questions and points. So, but Jerry, the League has witnessed, local governments have witnessed a sea change in how local governments are financed. Let's take the window 2005 to 2016. Can you talk about, can you give an overview of some of those major changes, please?
Well, the major change, Steve, is primarily levy limits. We're at a point now where cities and villages and towns are captives to net new construction. How many new houses are being built in your community? Prior to that law, municipalities had budgets that were growing at about the same rate as the state's budget. So we were in a similar boat as the state legislature. Needed to be frugal, but you could do what you had to do. Well, now you had, first of all, the recession, which decimated the construction industry. And Wisconsin has not come back. We're just not building new homes. And local governments are slowly but surely being strangled. There just aren't the resources to pave the streets, to mow the grass, to pay the firefighters. And what we're trying to let people know is, hey, you know, we've been making do, but a reckoning is quickly coming upon us.
This is such an important issue. Give us a quick definition of levy limits to somebody, a homeowner who might be watching this. Why do I care about levy limits? All I care about is the property tax bill I get every December. So give us the overview.
And what determines what happens to that property tax is what's called the net new construction in a community. Clintonville, Howard, Green Bay, Milwaukee, they're all subject to the same law. They may only increase their tax levy, which is what you pay in your property tax bill, by the percentage that new construction increased the pie. Now, 20 years ago, that made sense. That was above the rate of inflation, and that worked. But post-recession, net new construction hasn't met the rate of inflation in 10 years. And we're slowly but surely falling behind.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong. We are now in a rebound from the Great Recession. So as property values of homes and everything have gone up, your communities haven't been able to levy according to those new higher values because they can only levy on new construction, which is a very small subset of that increase.
Important distinction, Steve. You're absolutely right. The increase in your assessment doesn't make the pie any bigger. It doesn't increase the levy. It just changes who pays. You know, if Sharon's house went up in value 20% and Eric's only went up 5%, Sharon is going to pay a fractionally bigger piece of the pie, but it's the same pie. The only thing that grows the pie is net new construction, and that is a very small number.
Now let's hear from 3 local administrators on what levy limits has meant for their communities. Paul.
Well, in Howard, we are a high-growth community compared certainly to the people sitting here today. But so we're in the top 20. We grow about 2%. You know, we have an assessed value of $1.5 billion, so 2% is, you know, $30 million in net new construction. But we're also unusual in that our tax rate is very low. Our tax rate's under $4 per thousand. So, you know, you can celebrate $10 million in new growth. It allows you to spend $39,000 more than you spent the year before.
39,000.
Right. So for $10 million, which, you know, I talked to other communities who have mill rates in the 8 and 9 per thousand range, and we have to work twice as hard as you do to get, you know, so, you know, a new police officer, we'd like to fill out one of our shifts, which would cost, which we you know, Howard's a little unusual too. You know, we do everything, we do all these best practices. We hire out our law enforcement through Brown County. We hire out our assessor, we hire out our attorney, we hire out our IT, we hire out our EMS, which is a very low cost per capita. We have a volunteer paid on call fire department. So we've done all these things to be incredibly efficient to get us down to the lowest per capita spending of any community our size, $269 per person. It's incredibly low. So, there's no really low-hanging fruit to cut to do anything new or to add, and as you add your population of 5,000 people in 10 years or 15 years, you do need to do more stuff. You've got more streets than ever to plow, more streets than ever to repair. We had a big growth spurt in the 90s where we actually brought down our tax rate, many times not taking the full levy increase we could have had by law, just because a conservative board, they did the right thing. You spend what you need to spend, and now when we need to spend, we still don't have enough, even despite all that growth. And that's our big focus. Every year we try and get $30 million in growth coming into our community.
And you're a growing community as opposed to like Eric and Sharon. Eric and then Sharon.
Yeah, it's a have and have not situation. So there are a lot of communities like us in South Milwaukee where you are literally looking at almost zero net new construction, zero growth. And that's because we're landlocked. We are fully developed, and most everything we do is redevelopment. And that's just, I'm proud of that. I'm proud of what we're doing in redevelopment, but it doesn't help that number. And we're so tied to that number and held hostage to that number that it impacts what you do. I think levy limits impact every citizen every single day. They may not know it, but they do. It's the stuff we talked about, right? Mowing, it's grass, it's picking up your garbage, it's police and fire, it's all the basic services people come to expect from a city. It impacts because of dwindling resources, costs going up, and we can't always meet those needs. We try hard. We have great people trying very hard in this time to do this, and we've increased efficiencies, we've innovated, we've partnered, we're looking to do more of that, all of these things, that low-hanging fruit you talked about, and we'll continue to do that. But still, it is incredibly difficult and sometimes almost impossible to do this, but we do, and we take pride in that. But the number I point to is this. City of South Milwaukee levied $10.7 million base operating levy this year, $10.7 million. Because of levy limits, we were told by the state you can increase your levy by $9,000. That's $10.7 million, $9,000+
Your number is 9,000. Yours was 39,000.
Well, for $10 million, so we had about 120,000 some years.
Yeah, thank you. Excuse me.
And some are better places than others. We could talk about the reasons why, but everyone is feeling this to some degree. For us, I know there are hundreds of communities like us, big, small, urban, rural, red, blue, across the state. I know the league is doing a lot of work to try and tell those stories more because legislators and residents and all kinds of constituencies need to understand what we're facing.
Okay.
Well, and just real quick to jump in before Sharon talks about how they're coping, Eric talked about the haves and the have-nots. If you consider Howard a have, and I would argue that the challenges are very similar there, but a have in the sense that they've got more than 2% growth. 9 out of 10 cities and villages in Wisconsin are in the have-not category. Mm-hmm. Only 1 in 10 is seeing growth at that level. Mm-hmm. So the overwhelming majority of taxpayers in this state are in the have-not category.
Yeah.
Even the haves are hampered, though. I mean, you can
It's still difficult because I think we're seeing this big movement of people from rural communities moving into the more urbanized areas.
Suburbs,
From Green Bay down to Kenosha, now Racine's going to explode.
Right.
And obviously Dane County's had a lot of success, but these towns that are out there, little cities that we drive by all the time that now they're all bypassed by major highways, the Shawanoes and places like that, I worry about their future. I mean, how are they going to continue to provide any services whatsoever to their residents when they're not getting any additional funding through any source?
And I want to come back to the new construction, but I want to give Sharon a chance to talk about
Sure.
levy limits impact. And Clintonville, population 4,500. Did I get that right?
Yes, thereabout. We have the problem that we are remote. We don't have the highways.
Wapaka County.
We are 45 minutes from Appleton. We're an hour from Green Bay, an hour from Oshkosh. We don't have larger cities that we could, kind of ride on the coattails. Yeah. It's an aging population in our town. Our net new construction was 0.19 last year. 0.19. And
even though the equalized value, I think, went up 7%, but that's okay.
We did. Our equalized
that's
value,
right.
it did. The problem that we have is that because our net new construction has been historically low, we have become very reliant on our borrowing to fund a lot of our, well, all of our capital needs. And that is just digging a hole and kicking the can. You know, we're trying to, you know, the goal is to limit the impact on people now, but the problem is that that's making it, you know, magnifying the effect on people down the road when we have to borrow. You've got a levy or a mill rate under 4. Our levy that's for our debt payment alone is almost $4.
Just to
Just-
pay for yesterday's
Just to
repairs.
pay for yesterday's.
Just to pay for yesterday's borrowing.
Exactly.
And not for new borrowing, new programs, and 1 mile of village street cost how much?
1 mile of street's going to run you probably about $4 million to do. You know, all, you know, infrastructure and everything else. You know, and I want to point out that we're talking about 1 in 10 having, you know, the over 2%. When this program was, or this law was first put into effect, they had a floor limit, you know, so you had a minimum, it was 2%. They were saying, so now you have 1 in 10, only 1 in 10 or even above that floor limit right now.
Right.
We have some grossly deteriorating streets. And I joke, but it's serious, you know, are we gonna go back to the days of dirt roads because we can't afford to fund what we need to for our streets? I mean, we're gonna eventually hit our debt limit capacity.
Let's look at the changes. Let's use our first chart, and let's look at the changes. I think you all have them, and how local government is financed over that 11-year window. So you had property taxes was 46% in 2005 of paying. This is statewide, okay? Statewide local services. Then that has gone to 53%, 52.9. State aid has dropped in 2005 from 26.1% to 20.7%. Fees and fines up in a small way. Federal aid, that's down 1 percentage point, and other is up, that's miscellaneous. Now that we looked at this chart, statewide, any PSs from any of you on these changes?
Well,
And the pinches, Eric?
Well, it's just more and more is put on the property tax, and it's not sustainable. It hasn't been sustainable, and it's not going forward for certain. You just, things have to get in line. The more you throw onto the property tax without any flexibility given to local governments to raise revenue other ways, be it from state aid coming in or whatever other options locally are presented, without having that flexibility, it more and more gets put on the property tax. The numbers show it. And hence, as costs go up and you're limited by raising your property tax, something has to give. And again, it's just not sustainable in the current system to adequately fund first-class city services, the stuff that people come to expect.
Okay, now let's get into property taxes, because you've heard elected officials of both parties take pride in controlling property taxes. The governor is seeking a 3rd term, and if you go to his website, one of his foundational principles is the median valued home in Wisconsin will have a lower net property tax bill in December 18 and December 19 than it did when I took office. So the goal of the capital elected officials has been to control property taxes, and the governor said that's been a major success. But you're on the other end, and that success has come at a price for you local elected officials, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, one of the reasons the property taxes are lower is because they took quite a bit. They increased funding to tech schools.
Yes?
And then told tech
I think
schools.
$400 million.
Yeah, and I mean, that would be another option for us, is either increase funding to us. I mean, you're talking about the decreases in state aid since the levy limits. I mean, in 1998, Howard received $1.2 million in state shared revenue.
98.
In 98, now our population has grown substantially since then, and this last year we got $537,000 in the state. So, you know, it's almost to the point where you kind of think, oh, eventually let's take it all away, right? But so, you know, something, if you want to keep the property tax levy down on the average property taxpayer's bill, you either have to increase funding to schools and lower what they can levy, or increase funding to us through means other than property tax. If that's your main goal, you have to do kind of what you do with the tech schools.
I guess my question is, do your homeowners, let's not talk about commercial and all these other types of property, are they aware of the price of controlling their property tax bill? Because local government is a government they're more inclined to like as opposed to counties and state government, and let's not even get into the feds, right? I mean, there is a local bond with local governments.
I think they get it, or increasingly going to get. They have to get it. We told that story in our referendum. We talk about that too, but we needed to tell that
How
story.
big of
They
a
didn't
referendum
understand.
were you chasing?
We need to fund our paramedic program for the long term, and add 2 new police officers. What we sought, and we sought a 6% increase in property tax in the levy to do that, and about $600,000 a year, I believe it was, and it passed 2 to 1.
2 to 1.
In part, a lot of it was an education campaign. Just exactly what you're talking about. We had to have people understand the issue here a little bit, and we still need. There's a lot more work to do. The league can help with that. Others can help. People need to understand kind of what the impact of levy limits has been, and because they see it every day, they see it on the front lines. Literally, their garbage picked up. They see it. It's the front-facing services of government that are impacted the most by levy limits, while the politicians in Madison get to pose for holy pictures and have the press release and the photo op. Look what we did with the average tax bill for a homeowner. Great. They leave us to pick up the pieces. And it's unfortunate. It's just a reality, and I don't see that changing in the election year. I hope so. We've got stories to tell and issues to take up, and we think for even common sense flexibility to help people like us out. But it is a political issue right now, and that's a little bit unfortunate.
I want to circle back to something Sharon said. Your community is aging, but is there a greater awareness and a recognition of the need to control property taxes in an aging, relatively small community, Sharon?
It is. We are
Because there's a
actually,
bind there. There's a tension.
there is. We actually are working very hard to lower our tax rate. Our mill rate's about 9.27 this year. And, you know, we are looking primarily at our debt load, trying to find a way to reduce how much we owe and our required levy for our debt payments. There's not really much I think that we can do to our operating levy because we have already we're really kind of down to their bare bones on this right now. The problem is then you start looking at we can't make some of the the improvements that we need. And I'm not talking about necessarily, these great big advancements. I'm talking about we've got a road on our downtown area that when you drive on it, it almost gives you whiplash. It's so bad.
Do you have any plans to rebuild that road, or is that just out of the question?
No, it's actually on the list to do next year, but you bring up it makes a good point. It was supposed to get done this year.
Okay.
But because of our restrictions with our levy and the commitment that our council has made to reducing our debt, we actually pushed all of our streets back a year. And everyone knows, again, I mean, they're not going to get any better until you put money into them. So, our focus is trying to limit that impact on the property owner. But when the only way we have to raise revenue is our property owner, and that's primarily restrictions placed on us by the state, they're going to feel it in the pocketbook because there's only so much we can do.
Circle back to the cost of reworking that main artery for your community. How much?
That road with all the infrastructure, water, wastewater combined, we're looking, and it is maybe 1.5 blocks, and it's going to cost us about $400,000, $450,000.
So, and I'm Oak Creek Parkway in South Milwaukee. It's about a half mile long, 3/4 mile long. Actually, a connector road to our high school and middle school, and I have a son at the middle school right now. I drive it almost every day. It's in awful shape. It has been for years. It's been on the Milwaukee County's list of road projects for years and kept getting pushed back. It was supposed to be 2017, then it was 18. Now it's going to be 19 again. Thank God for a major rainstorm in February, which forced a huge pothole to develop where they literally had to close the road. And that forced the discussion, and it became from a nice to have to a must have, and lo and behold, the $1 million project is getting done. But this is how stuff is getting done right now, on an emergency basis where you're lurching from one project to the next because it has to be done. It's not a smart way to do things at all, but this is what we're left with.
But WisconsinEye covered extensively the budget debate, and I remember when the governor signed the budget, he said in his press release, this budget increases local road aids. Doesn't it?
A little bit.
A little bit?
You have to understand how the formula works and not doing it people do. It's based on how much money you have spent over the past 6 and 3 years. I mean, Jerry can probably explain it better than I do. In Howard, we had a lot of road projects, so last year we saw like $100,000 increase in our state transportation aids, but not so much because the state added money to the pot, but because we had increased our spending over 3 years.
Okay.
And
And Sharon's
don't-
looking up a number.
Yeah, our increase from last year to this year, we're looking at about $20,000.
$20,000. Jerry?
Well, that'll dig the hole. You'll get about that much in the
Yeah, I get like a foot, maybe.
And frankly, the increase in general transportation needs was good. But the reality is that money has to be matched with property tax levy money, which is still the biggest piece. And if you're working with $9,000 and that's got to cover everything in the city, or $5,000, that's your total levy increase, there's no money to match that. It just doesn't add up.
Maybe even, let's say it's 100,000 or 200,000. That's $1 million Oak Creek Parkway Road project. It's not going to get it done.
Okay.
We just submitted for a federal grant for road projects for next year to try to get 2 of them done. Those 2 road projects, which is one of the ones I mentioned earlier, and another street, we're looking at about $1.6 million. And the grant caps out at $500,000.
Okay, we're going to come back to highways. I want to go to chart number 2, Jerry. I want you to look at it. This is new construction. What does that tell you, this chart? Who's ahead, who's gaining? I mean, you alluded to it earlier, but most of these communities are not growing at any pace to pay for existing services, let alone any new services.
If you look at
So what
that-
do you see when you look at chart number 2?
I see interstates. I mean, first and foremost, if you're not on Interstate 90 or 94 or Interstate 41 or Interstate 39,
Yes.
you have a real problem. The second challenge, and it goes to this bigger picture, it's Clintonville's challenge. There are communities and counties in Wisconsin where the population is stagnant at best. And if Wisconsin's going to succeed, we've got to turn that around. We have to draw people here. And the reason why that bears on this levy discussion is we have to stop talking about, well, how long can we put this off? And how long can we let that get seedier? Or how long can we let the lawn grow? And we've got to start investing in downtowns. We've got to start, the governor's spending how many millions of dollars in Chicago on advertising. Whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, the point is we have to be working on attracting instead of just patching. And right now we're just patching.
I think it's 8 million, Chicago, Detroit, the Twin Cities. But, okay, you have now tied development to construction, so now go immediately to chart 3. This is development and highways. I want to talk to the three local officials. When you find your communities, is it really this simple? You have to have good highways to develop? Or is that too simplistic? Sharon?
I think it's a piece of the pie. There's no one magic fix for situations like this. You have the ability when you can have a higher traffic coming through your town, you have easier access, you can get to places quicker. We don't have a quick access to the larger cities, as mentioned earlier. We're an hour away
Yep.
from Green Bay, but I also think it's only, and I've only been up here for a year, so maybe 30 miles, 35 miles, something like that. So mileage-wise, it's not that far. It's just we don't have a easy route to and from these bigger places. So if people wanted to live here and maybe work in a larger city, they can't even do that because people don't want to drive an hour every day to go to work. I did that in grad school and I hated it. Okay. So it's a piece of the pie, but it also brings some other issues potentially too.
And then Eric, your community is on this whole discussion, the Foxconn, the widening of that. But you said you're landlocked.
Yeah, so we're about 3 to 4 miles from an interstate. We've solid transportation options. I can get from my door of my home to my workplace, my day job, in 22 minutes and west of downtown Milwaukee. But we're not near an interstate necessarily, or not as close as certainly Oak Creek or other communities are in the area. We're 20 minutes door to door, South Milwaukee to Foxconn. But again, not on the interstate directly, but again, door to door. We think that's an opportunity for us to attract people looking to live and maybe open a business and or supplier company, et cetera, to South Milwaukee. We're actually very much working on that. But all of that said, highways and development, it helps. In these two charts, and they're good charts, but there's a deeper story, right? Inside each county, each of those counties that had a color assigned to it, or near each of these highways, is one community that's growing, one that isn't, two that isn't, and then maybe one that is, and then they're next to each other. We're next to Oak Creek, which is growing significantly. This is great for us and great for Oak Creek. Franklin is growing some, but yet there's Cut A to the north. I mean, it really is an individual story that literally can vary on what side of the street you're on.
Okay. And then, Paul, your take on this
I mean,
relationship
well,
between...
it's important. It's not the end all, because you could have a good highway system, but you know, he's landlocked, so he's just stuck. I mean, what he's saying is he doesn't have any lots to even develop.
Yeah.
It's not like they
One
have
or two,
It's
maybe.
not like they have an open subdivision with lots. He'd be sitting here happier. It'd be less of a challenge. But I mean, you're isolated. That's a problem. Now in Green Bay, thanks to DOT, we now have this wonderful transportation system. But we all have. In the southern part of Brown County, there's a very important crossing that we'd like to see put in just for our overall community. Getting that kind of money, $150 million, is really tough. In Howard and Hobart, we've been pushing for another interchange, and it's probably a $12 million project, and we can't get any traction. I mean, our DOT is so busy just trying to maintain what they have that they're actually not doing a lot of newer type places that would help with economic development. So,
This is a good... excuse me, Paul,
to me, they need to weight economic development into their project.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. Let me ask a question from Facebook here. Are levy limits leading to more collaboration and shared services? Local officials, administrators?
I'd say I wouldn't make that direct connection. I'd say you just have to do that anyway. I mean, you should want to and have to do that. There's always more efficient and better ways to do government. In Milwaukee County, we have 19 communities, incorporated communities, often doing things 19 different ways. At least in the past we had. That's changing. Has to continue to change. We've done partnerships and collaborations and all of those things. We need a lot more work to do in that area. As levy limits driven that, I think to some degree, because of what the financial realities of where we're at, we have to. But I would like to think that would happen without levy limits, because it's just the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, it is a beneficial. I mean, we've started looking at ways that we can do that. One that seems so silly, but we actually purchase paper jointly with the school board to save money.
Yeah.
It's a good example, thank you.
We also do have our fire department it's an all volunteer force, which brings in a whole nother host of issues. But we provide services, we contract to provide services to a couple of other municipalities surrounding us. So that is one way that we have tried to kind of share the burden. But they're all really in the same situation we are. We've got a million, 1.1, 1.2 million fire apparatus that we're going to have to purchase in 2 years, I think it is.
1.2 worth of
It's
fire,
about
fire
1.1
equipment?
No.
No, just one.
Probably a ladder truck,
It's
probably.
an aerial.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a
One ladder
ladder
truck.
truck.
We got that same expense in front of us coming up.
And the other municipalities are pretty small, so our share of that is going to be about $750,000, give or take. And we only borrow 1.8 typically for about 3 years is what we're trying to do. So you buy a fire truck and that's all you're going to get done. But we are looking for other ways to share services, but when you're already faced with, you can bring in maybe a population of maybe 400 from here and 400 from here. It's a small piece. Like I said, we provide services to I think 2 other municipalities for fire services, but we still carry 75 to 80% of the budgetary.
And Paul, didn't you provide a list of services that are not provided by?
Well, we contract for them. They're provided.
contract, yes.
We contract out our trash too. If I didn't mention that, I mean, we use a private hauler for that.
So you contract for, go ahead, give
we
us that list.
contract out for assessing, for attorney, for IT, for law enforcement, and for trash, and then EMS. Yeah, those are contracted. Those aren't necessarily, the only other government provider and all that is Brown County.
Okay.
And Swamico, Alloway, Bellevue, we all contract Brown County Sheriff's Department, and it's incredible savings per capita.
Yeah.
It's a great model. I've actually given talks with the sheriff about it to other groups. It works really well. But you're talking about working together. I think when state revenue got really slashed, a lot of communities sat down. What can we do together?
Yep.
We work with the village of Swamico and Pulaski to provide fire service by knowing what everybody has. We work together, kind of like we have a Packerland Fire District, and so we try to do our capital expenditures so they can get their ISO rating because we are agreeing to provide a certain ladder truck, that kind of stuff. So we're not double purchasing really expensive pieces of equipment.
But what Paul is doing is great. I think the point, and from the Facebook Live viewers' question, it's not levy limits that drove that. I mean, he has a very cheap village board.
Well,
They're a very,
in all
very wise.
seriously, northeastern Wisconsin is probably the most fiscally tight place in the state. I mean, they just got a sales tax, and it's only a half-cent sales tax, and it's just for 72 months.
Okay.
Before that, we had the Packer tax. When the Packer tax went away, then that just went away for a couple of years. But the village of Bellevue is the only other town even close to us and actually under us on per capita spending.
I didn't want to get away from the question without making the point that it's not really levy limits driving that. It's just a very fiscally conservative community.
Well, we've been doing some of this work before levy limits. So we provide paramedics to Cudahy, our neighbor to the north. So any 911 call, EMS call, they're coming from South Milwaukee if they're an ALS level call. If you have a house fire anywhere in the southern half of Milwaukee County, just take a look at the fire trucks that show up at that scene. There's probably 8 for all different communities, 128 they were feeling, et cetera. So a lot of this happens already. We have a ladder truck purchase coming as well. We just recently signed an agreement with Cudahy and St. Francis, a joint purchasing and equipment sharing relationship, something on paper. This happens a lot already in reality, but we're putting it on paper in my mind, partly because I knew this purchase was coming, and I don't want to be on the hook solely for a ladder truck that honestly all of us are going to benefit from. So that'll be a conversation we'll have. But yeah, we also contract out our attorney and our assessor, and our economic development director is a contracted position. So we've done a lot of this work, and it's just the right thing to do fiscally, and also we think a delivery of the service too.
I want to go through what appears to me as a layman some potential sources of additional revenue for local services. And I'd like to get not all of your reaction, but when I say wheel tax, how do you respond? Not politically palatable? Not worth it?
It's not worth it. I mean, we could get maybe 90,000 a year, maybe.
Okay.
And then you have the issues where you're going to end up having to refund some of that because there's some overlap where it looks like they're inside your municipality, but they're actually in one of the townships.
It looks like you're domiciled in your
yes.
community, but they aren't.
Yeah,
So
not everybody's paying.
Okay.
Not all of your users are paying.
I mean,
into that
I wouldn't
system.
object to the state raising the vehicle registration and turning the additional money over to municipalities to take care of their roads. That was the way I would approach it, as opposed to having wheel taxes here and there.
But you said to take care of meaning your local roads,
To help
when we
us
have
too.
this impasse in the capital on how to pay for major
sure.
state highways.
Absolutely.
I'd be okay with that too. I mean, if at least dedicated towards theoretically the things a wheel tax should support at roads.
The only issue that I have with that, or the potential issue that I see with that, is that just makes municipalities more reliant and more under the control of what the state does. The decisions at the state level just are going to impact municipalities even more if you turn that control, or if you go that way. I mean, it's definitely an avenue, but people have to be aware that the more we become reliant on what the money is that the state decides to give us, it means even less control at the local level.
It's local flexibility to me. It's like otherwise, who knows what the next administration will do? Will there be further cuts in state aids, in shared revenue, or in the case, say, of Milwaukee County and our paramedic program? Part of the reason we went to referendum is there are continued cuts in funding from the county to our paramedic. When you're relying on others, I mean, it's a problem, and I think flexibility is important. To wheel tax in Milwaukee County, Milwaukee County has a wheel tax already, $30. Chris Abley wanted to raise it to $60. They did not. So it made it politically unpalatable, and honestly, I'm not a huge fan of wheel taxes.
Okay.
But you would have then layered a second wheel tax on people. City of Milwaukee, if you're a resident of the city of Milwaukee, you have two. You get the city and the county.
Yes.
So it's to me, it unfortunately is only one of the few options. The state literally is giving you only a few options.
That's why it comes up.
That's why it comes up, because
why
there's literally nothing else for revenue.
What about more state aid? Jerry, let me ask you this. When the governor signed the law giving $122 million in rebate checks to parents of children 18 and under, did you grit your teeth in saying that's money that could have been used to relieve some of the pressure on local governments like this?
To be honest, I had two reactions. The first one is that's good for my grandchildren. My kids are all older than that. But yeah, and that's fundamentally, I think to Sharon's point, that's the problem with being dependent on state aid. People have forgotten, but shared revenue was the income tax. They created the income tax in the 1915s. 90% of that money was to go to local governments. Today, 15% of that money goes to local governments. Being thrown into the pool at the Capitol means you're competing against Medicaid, which you're going to lose. You're competing against school aids, which you're going to lose. And you're competing against every other priority out there. The better system is to give local governments the options, more revenue options.
Before we get to that, now some people might say, just lay off more government workers. It sounds to me like you three local officials saying we have done that.
I am the city administrator. I am the economic development coordinator. I am the HR director. I am the public information officer. I am the emergency government director.
Just that. Okay.
And there's probably one or two in there that I'm just not thinking
Do you
of.
sweep your office floor and empty the way? Go ahead.
Shared firemen clean our building.
Shared firemen clean your
Seriously.
bill?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, well,
thank you.
I mean-
Great example.
You know, it's like, what else can we do?
Exactly. So the answer of cutting staff is that is not the answer. You know, we have 3 utilities. We have our water, our wastewater, and electric, and that is probably a quarter of our staff.
Okay.
You know, and that requires some personnel. So cutting staff, for at least for us anyways, is not an answer.
How many FTEs do you have?
We have 50, and that
50.
includes, now we do not contract our police out, so that
Right.
includes our police, so that's 20% of our full-time staff. We have 12 between our utilities, and then we have park and rec and our streets and our admin staff. So it's for a size for what we provide and everything that we do. And believe me, I've had conversations about cutting services, and I thought the noose was going around my neck. So
Well, no one wants to cut, right?
yeah,
And
no one wants to cut.
no one wants to have something removed. They want
No.
to have lower taxes, et cetera. And I get that. I absolutely. We've got to find ways to keep taxes low and increases low, but they don't want. But folks, and I get it, don't want a cut in services that may come with it.
I have been saying this pretty much since the day I came to Wisconsin. All right, so like I said, I've been here for about a year. Come from Georgia. We don't have shared revenues in Georgia. What we do have is municipalities who are allowed to vote to institute a sales tax.
Sharon?
Did
that
I
was
beat
the,
you
That
to
was
it?
the next question. What about giving municipalities sales tax authority? And remember, this was kind of a question I told you guys to be thinking about. If you could wave a wand, how would you pay for local government? So
I like the idea of a local option sales tax, a special purpose local option sales tax, or transportation. In fact, there's a community where I did my internship. In fact, I think it was yesterday, they actually went to the polls to vote on a T-Splost, which would add a 0.5% to the sales tax that would go straight towards transportation. It's the only thing it could be used for.
I've got to follow up. In Georgia, what are some local sales taxes that pay for local services? How high do they go?
The county that I was in before I came here was 8%.
And the state sales tax on top of that was?
Well, no, I'm sorry. 8% is a total sales
Thank
tax.
you.
So for 3 or 3.5% of that stays with the county. And then it's then not just with the county either. It actually is divided up between the municipalities. So municipalities get some of that money too. And I did the math, and I mentioned this earlier. I did the math when I found out how much the Waupaca County collected in a 0.5% sales tax
right.
last year. And I did some basic math, and it would have blown out the water our state aid. Like, we could, in theory, have gotten rid of the state aid and relied, if we were at like an 8%. And we would be able to do that through vote. I mean, it's in Georgia, it still requires the vote. So it's still the people saying, yes, you can do this.
And isn't there a cap on
There
the
is.
percentage that
There is. And
local sales tax? Okay.
I'm not sure. I think it's 8%.
To sales tax, I'm not sure. I'd seek it for South Milwaukee, I just want the options, the flexibility. Where in the
What's a
state-
better way, Eric?
I think levy limit reform. We could talk about that. I
Okay,
think
you blow up the levy limits.
No, I would. Well, ideally, yes, but in reality, I think just sensible, common sense. I think small reform, politically feasible reform, in my mind, would help us a lot.
Be specific. Feasible.
So, for me,
You don't like my term, blow up the levy limits. What's a better?
because I
what's
want
a
to
better
deal in
limit?
reality. I don't think we're going to have a day anytime soon that Madison's going to allow that to happen. So what do we work within what's real? And to me, what could be real here, what should be real, inflation floor. Simple, right? We're a 0.09 increase. How about inflation's the floor? I think that's one alternative that should be looked at closely. Go back to what it was initially. Anyway, it's not a new thing. When they
Inflation-
first were put in place, right? Levy limits had a floor of inflation.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so
they
bring
had
that
a floor of 2%
or
at one
2%,
point.
which is even
2%.
often higher than inflation, I believe.
Inflation plus new construction.
To me, inflation would be fine.
Okay.
A floor of
Bring it up.
inflation. So, but if
Yeah.
your new construction is 4, then you can go up to 4. If you're like us at 0.09, inflation. Or if let's say you have 2 straight years of no levy limit, of almost nothing as far as growth, maybe you're allowed then to go up 3. Or just some recognition that there are hundreds of communities like us that have dealt with this for 8 to 10 years now, of essentially zero levy growth and what that's meant for us. And that flexibility for me, that's where I'd seek. Now, some might want a sales tax. I think Milwaukee County funding parks, and we're 30% parks, that would be a great option. I think that should be considered. I think voters have said they would support that as well in a past referendum. So maybe they're there. For some, maybe it is a wheel tax for some communities. I don't think for us. But again, that flexibility where the state at least, if you're not going to increase shared revenue and increase more money from the state, then let us do it. But don't do neither.
And I think that's kind of what I was getting. I realize that the lost or the splost, I mean, that's kind of the pie in the sky thing. And reform does absolutely need to happen. But I think, like he said, the biggest goal is allowing us that flexibility, because once again, other than state, than the shared revenues, the state aids, all we have is the property tax. And
No wonder people
you
are so
need
frustrated with it.
exactly. We need to be able to diversify where we collect or where the responsibility lies for services. I mean, with the property tax, it's only on the people who own property. We have municipalities that come and use our services, come and use our parks, that come and use these other, our roads. We don't have a way to capture any of that. We still provide these services to townships that don't pay taxes.
And I want to give Paul a way to wave a wand. If it were up to you, better way to finance local services.
I think what you said was right. You have to have some kind of diversification, because you have some communities that don't have any real retail in them. We have a Meijer, we have a Fleet Farm, we have a Woodman's, we have a Walmart, or a Menards. So we actually have. We'd get some revenue if we did it. Most of those are new because we're one of those fast new communities, right? But there are other communities that don't really have a lot of retail. The future of retail is really sketchy right now with the whole Amazon effect. I mean, we all know how many boxes we get a week at our house, and we never go to the mall anymore, right? So, you have to really diversify how we get money. The one thing, though, that is as Eric said, to tell people they can't even go vote for a tax increase or for a sales tax seems ridiculous. Why can't the people speak? The other big issue is no one's really studied like our formula or school funding formula, which is a huge thing. Our school district is the biggest reason people come to live in Howard. But until the referendum they passed just this last year, they were the 420th out of 421st lowest funded per capita revenue limit. And so they're up there making, doing the thing we are, with the shadows and the mirrors and everything, trying to continue to put out a great education. But that is 50% of our residents' tax bill. The county's 25. We're 20.
Our school, the story that we're sharing today, I think, is often the school story too. Our school district right now is looking at operating referendum for this fall. Operating. They had a significant capital one about 12 years ago, which we've gotten some great community buildings and a PAC out of, and a great new high school. But operating because of the limitations put on them by the lack of flexibility afforded them by Madison lawmakers.
I want you to say something you said earlier. Your community is borrowing for trees? It is.
To take down trees and plant trees, yes. Because we can. And if we didn't do it, it wouldn't happen. And we need to do it. So Emerald ash borer, we're all dealing with that, I'm sure, to some degree. We're removing hundreds and hundreds of trees. We're almost at the end, or getting close to the end of that cycle. We're finally getting in the replanting business, which we weren't as much in. We're much more in now. But that's a that's a long-term effort, and trees are a capital expense.
Okay, there's a couple more subjects before we bring this to an end, and I want to use a prison example. I covered the public hearing in Alloway where Alloway said, tear down the Green Bay prison, which dates from 1800 and something, because we have development potential for that. And, but Brown County legislators, local officials say, keep it in Brown County. Does your community want that prison, Paul?
I don't want the prison.
You'd-
Most of my staff don't think it's a good idea.
Eric, you want that prison?
No.
No, you don't. Why?
Well, no. I'd take a state office building, which they're talking about building a new one, by the way.
So, Clintonville?
I'm probably going to shoot myself in the foot, but I would, because we are that desperate for growth.
Okay.
And don't get me wrong, they actually looked at doing that a few years back, and the community was up in arms. The community didn't want it, and ultimately it went somewhere else. But we need growth, or we are going to die.
Okay.
And that's the thing. The reason you want a prison is not because you want a prison, it's
Want the
because you want the employees, right? That's what communities like Clintonville need. Is they need an employer. I mean, there's only one Epic in the state, but everybody would love a Epic Junior, right? I mean, it's like everybody needs employers. And right now in Brown County, we've got we got Schneider, and we've got a number of good ones, Bay Industries and Schreiber. We got some really great employers in Brown County, and that's why people come there. Plus, there's a lot of innovative people, like the breakthrough fuels people, and so you have job growth, and that's why the bigger metropolitan areas are drawing people from the rural communities.
And you're jealous. in
Well,
Clintonville of that
well,
growth.
keep
No,
it-
I know where
is-
she's going.
This is what's interesting about Clintonville. We are very blessed with a very strong manufacturing base. I was floored by how many large manufacturers, well, I say large, what I would consider large employers in our area. We have four businesses that probably employ 1,500 people between the four of them. They can't get employees.
Now hiring.
You know,
is the sign.
constantly. It's the constant fight. How do we get people? We need people. We need growth in that respect, and we can't do that. We can't improve things to get people to want to move to Clintonville without like a prison would bring revenue. It would bring other people. It would bring growth that would allow us to start doing some of this other things that we need to do to improve the city, to bring employees in, because I'm telling you, we start losing our manufacturers because they have to go somewhere else. I mean, Clintonville's going to cease to exist.
We're losing a large part of the former Bucyrus mining equipment campus. 800,000 square feet of buildings, 30-some acres. That's going to be in redevelopment mode very soon, and it will not be, I'm certain, singularly heavy manufacturing. So it's a redevelopment opportunity, but a big loss of manufacturing for us. So we have to deal with that too. That's layered on to the other challenges we face. Now it's an opportunity to some degree, a tragedy in some degree. They're keeping some manufacturing in South Milwaukee. Caterpillar is, which is terrific. But we're stuck with this in the middle of our city is this large campus that we're working to redevelop. And I don't want a prison there, but there's a state office building opportunity, but it'll be a mixed use. It'll be a variety of things, but keep getting employees there, getting life and activity there will be really important.
Okay, I want to bring this to show and end with two questions, one for Jerry and then one for each of you. Jerry, there's an election November 6th. As your organization interviews candidates, given what we've heard, the frustrations and the stranglehold, that's a league term, what are you going to be asking those candidates to support going into the next session?
I'm going to be asking my members to stop being so doggone diplomatic. I want them, for years, cities and villages in the state have basically been making it work, making it work, making it work. It's time for them to start telling these stories to the candidates for governor, to the candidates for the legislature. We need a more diverse revenue system. I don't like property taxes either, but we need a more diverse system, a more locally controlled system, and that's the question for candidates. Will you go there?
Will that question entail giving local communities like these a referendum option for a local sales tax, or is that a hill too far? It's just not going to pass.
I think Wisconsin ought to get out of the 19th century, take a look at the 20th, maybe someday we can look at the 21st. A sales tax and a local option sales tax? Absolutely. That's just one of the things they ought to look at.
Okay, then a final question for each of you local officials. If the current situation, levy limits, continues, because of political decisions, policy decisions made in the Capitol. What services are at risk? What are you worried about? What's your community's going to lose 5, 6, 7 years from now? Sharon.
I don't even think it's going to be 5, 6, 7 years from now. We're going to lose employees because we're going to start shifting. We're going to start reducing benefits. We're going to have to look at. I talked about getting rid of our street sweeper. That's a $250,000 piece of equipment, and that's going to be an impact not just on our streets but on our stormwater. And
one fire truck costs how much?
it's like $1.2 million.
And your street sweeper is $250,000.
$250,000. That's supposed to be replaced next year.
And those are threatened by the current fiscal realities on Clintonville, Wisconsin.
There's a lot.
Okay. Eric?
We had this recently, but we worried about the future of our paramedic programs. The first reason why we went to referendum is the future of that program was in some peril. We were plugging holes in funding with fund balance and rainy day fund infusions of cash, and it just wasn't sustainable. So we went to referendum to ask voters to make sure that doesn't happen. We also added 2 new police officers, which still were among the smallest per capita in the region with our police force still. But it's what would go away. I would have feared paramedics before the referendum, before voters said 2 to 1. After hearing the case, like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. We're willing to pay more to fund this. You worry about all the things that governments do. Importantly, and maybe it's you keep doing the same things, but you don't do them as well or as often. Mm-hmm. You don't mow the lawn as often. It gets taller. That problem neighbor you have, whose lawn is a foot tall, we may not get to it now for 2 more weeks, and now it's 2 feet tall. That's the kind of stuff or you cut hours. We looked at cutting the library hours. We looked at, there's a number of things. It may not be a draconian cut, but it's a little slice here, a little slice there, and that all adds up. And the stuff you have to look at, it's stuff, honestly, I don't want to look at. Yeah. Residents expect a level of service. I want to deliver that level of service. We need flexibility from Madison, support from Madison to allow us to deliver that level of service.
Paul?
Well, Howard worked really hard to get out of debt and cash fund public improvements. So right now we resurface over $1 million of streets with cash. Okay, we don't borrow for it.
Cheers to you.
And we've worked over the last 5, 6 years since I've been there to get that amount up. Anytime we have a chance, anytime we have a savings, anytime we have an ability to increase our budget, to continue to cash fund, because we know we have all the streets we put into the 90s when we were growing very rapidly, they're going to have to start getting resurfaced, right? And that's going to be what you'll see is, that 1.2 million will drop to 1.1 million, to $1 million, to eventually till we end up on the wheel of debt that we never want to be on. That eventually we're going to say, we're done. We can't cash fund anything. It was great while we had it, and now we're going to go start borrowing. And what's dangerous about the borrowing, of course, is right now we're in this odd historic time of low interest rates. That's not going to be the way. I had a house once at 8% when I first got out of school. It's great having a 4% mortgage or a 3.5% mortgage. You can't bank on money being cheap forever. Okay. And so it's going to get people in big trouble.
Statewide perspective, quickly, Jerry?
Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance did a study. The way we fund local government, Wisconsin is unique. Nobody else does it this narrowly. We've got to take a look at alternatives. We put it off long enough.
This has been a critical dialogue with Jerry Duchesne of the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. I want to thank Sharon, Eric, and Paul. And you've been here long enough to be a Packer fan?
Oh, I was a Packer fan before I came. My husband's from Wisconsin.
Okay.
So.
I want to thank you for a discussion.
That should have been the first question.
I want to thank you for a discussion of a very important issue. I want to thank our Facebook watchers. Thank you.
All right. Pleasure.